What is going on, guys? Today we are back with another video. A little different kind of video. This one requires some recapping. And yeah, so I'll start it off by saying this. I've been on a 2-day trip to Minnesota. We fished some bigger lakes. The first lake we stopped at was Lake Winnebagosh. If you never heard of Lake Winnebagosh, it's kind of up in that Leech Lake, Grand Rapids area, Deer River. Great walleye fishery. I've been there several times, but I've never been there in the fall, right? So there was kind of a lot of unknowns with kind of what, where we were going to see fish, what we were going to do. But it's relatively common knowledge that in a lot of these bigger systems that have big shoreline flats, there's a push of walleyes to shallow water shoreline related structure in the fall like this. And that's kind of the bite that we were chasing, right? Now on a 70,000 acre lake, these things are obviously a little bit more difficult to get on sometimes than a smaller lake that has a good walleye population. But that was the goal, find walleyes up shallow. So we kind of started out fishing a lot of like 9 to 12 feet. And the reason I'm kind of doing this recap here is because the wind was insane for the 2 days we were up there. The wind was crazy, crazy wind, crazy weather, on and off like misty rain. So it was difficult. A bunch of cameras got soaked and all that good stuff, but it was difficult to like really document a lot of it. But we're gonna show you a very real interpretation of what happened, the conditions, the weather, the fish catching, and yeah, that's gonna kind of be that. But basically what we started out doing, like I said, was fishing a lot of that 9 to 12 foot range. Like the outside of some flats, some outside of some of these points that come offshore. And a lot of these lakes, whether it's like a Mille Lacs or like a Leech or like a Winnebagosh, the whole shoreline might be very flat, and then there might be one area that extends out a little bit farther, right? Or some kind of big shoreline point that comes out, which makes that flat a little bit more of a fish holding spot, right? So we were catching a few fish fishing this 9 to 12 foot range, and we were throwing rip and wraps and catching some smaller walleyes. We were throwing jigs and plastic, smaller walleyes, jigs and minnows, getting smaller walleyes. And it wasn't really till the middle or kind of afternoon, early afternoon, when we kind of got on the deal, right? And we were actually fishing the calmer side of the lake because it was really the only spot where you could actually fish. It was like 5-6 footers everywhere else. And we were fishing 4, 5, and 6 feet of water on a very fringy weed edge. So I'm gonna start airing some footage here of some of the fish once we found them, and we'll get into some details down the road.
It's acting awfully smallmouth fish. Might be our first deep. Oh yeah, that's not a walleye, is it? There's no way, man. It's not burning up here. What the hell do you have? So it is walleye. Yeah, it is a walleye. It is. Man, he is a fighter. Alright guys, this whole time I actually thought I had like a big smallmouth or something, but this is exactly what we came out here for, isn't it, Tom? Finally put our first big one in the boat. We'll take it. Alright, take a look at this big fat fish. We're fishing super shallow water today, a lot more shallow than we actually expected to be out here. So we switched it up a little bit, pitching jigs back with minnows, plastics, rip and wraps, catching them on everything right now. But yeah, that's what we're doing. That's what we're after.
Nice fish.
Get them back in. Alright, look at that. I just caught that nice one. Next cast, another one, but not nearly the same caliber fish, but hey, there
must be a lot of them in this lake like that.
A lot of chippewa looking eyes here.
Yeah. thing this jig trolling thing does for us, as we're kind of covering a little bit more water, it gives us a good idea. You know, we're seeing a lot on the graph as far as what's around us. Man, these things are just angry in 5 feet. Here's not a big one. About your cookie cutter 16-incher. But as we're just kind of trolling along with the jigs here, you can see we just saw that big pod. And I was like, Mitch, stop what you're doing, cast left, and boom, fish on right away. All right, so what we were fishing really as far as structure goes is not super obvious. You know, before I do these trips, you know, I've been to Winnebagosh, but I've never been there in the fall. Every time I've been there, it's been like early summer or summer. And I always do a little bit of research, and it seemed like kind of the popular thing was to either find weeds in like 7-8 feet of water, which we did not find. All the weeds we found were in like 4 or 5 feet of water and nothing super good looking. And the other thing that pops out in the map is some like little rock strands that come off the shoreline or close to some of these points that come off shoreline. And we just weren't getting a lot of bites there. And like I said we were doing is we were getting on these points, big shoreline flats that come out basically, that extend out. And we were getting like way up inside of all the structure, right? So we were basically just on a sand flat that was in 4, 5, and 6 feet of water, right? And we started seeing some screenshots that looked something like this here. Now they were kind of hard to decipher, but there was a lot of different kinds of fish up here. There was perch up here, there were walleyes up here, there were pike up here. There's a little bit of everything we were catching, and it was kind of difficult to see some of these fish just because of how shallow it was, right? And what you wouldn't see was just like fish solid everywhere, right? It'd be these little pods here, little pods here, little pods here, little pods here. And that's what we're kind of trying to pick apart, right? There was a lot of fish in a 100-yard stretch of this area. It was just kind of like, basically you'd get in them and just fan cast to them or jig troll to them. And kind of the jig trolling was kind of the deal, and that was kind of the most effective way for us to cover water. And I'll talk about that here in a second, but basically the primary thing we were using was a jig and a minnow. That was bizarre. Trolling jigs, I just kind of started pulling. I was like, oh, there's some weight there. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, I got a nice walleye on. It is obviously just an insanely windy, nasty day out. But can't complain with that. Catching walleyes. Lots of them. A few nice ones so far. Little 1/4 ounce jig. Oh, there we go. Nice Winnebagosh walleye right there. Just let him go. See you later, dude. Another nice walleye. All we're doing is dragging a lot of these 1/4 ounce Kaelin's Google Eye. That has been a hot color right there, and then a little fat head on there. And I just want to know, just out of curiosity, how many of these, because this is just like the cookie cutter, 1,000,000 of these size fish. I want to measure them quick. That is a 15 1/4 incher, just for reference. So the jig and minnow program is kind of a program that works everywhere in the fall. And you know, fishing this 4, 5, 6 feet of water, I would almost always go 1/8 ounce. It was just so windy you couldn't feel what you were doing with an 1/8 ounce. So we were fishing 1/4 ounce Kaelin's Google Eye jigs, and we were tipping them with like some bigger fat heads or smaller chubs or stuff like that. And you know, basically what we were doing as far as the jig trolling thing, which definitely was the most productive thing, you know, it's real flat water, right? So there's not going to be like a isolated sweet spot most of the time. So what we were doing is we were kind of pitching that jig back 20, 30, 40 feet behind the boat, and we were just kind of going with the troll motor about 1 mile an hour right in there. And basically we were just kind of popping it up Oh, Surly wants to get the camera now. We were popping that jig up, and just kind of the movement of the boat going forward, you know, would, you know, kind of hang that jig up and hit back to bottom, and you just kind of keep doing that like that, right? Keep going like that, and you'd pop that jig forward, and your line would go thunk as that jig was falling, and yeah, you just kind of let that fish eat it, eat it, eat it, eat it, and then a big swing into him, right? And that was kind of the most productive thing we ended up doing. Now, if we were doing this and going along, let's say we caught a fish, we looked at side imaging, there's a big pile of fish, then we'd just spot lock and pitch to them for a little bit, right? But one thing you run into a lot when you're fishing these big flats with no like isolated piece of structure where the fish are really relating to, is those fish are constantly moving, right? You might catch a fish, spot lock, cast to a pot of 30, catch another fish, and then look at your side imaging, it's blank, right? Because those fish are just constantly moving through that stuff, right? So the jig trolling thing was super crucial just for us to be able to, you know, keep getting fish and, you know, to find more fish. It was a super productive way to fish, and something that, you know, if you're from Wisconsin, you probably don't do it a whole lot just because there's not big enough lakes with big enough pieces of structure with enough fish on them, right? Doing that thing in Minnesota where you're fishing these really big lakes and trying to cover water, to cover a lot of these big flats to catch fish, definitely a killer way to fish, right? And we're gonna be doing some of this in the next video as well on Leech Lake. But yeah, here's basically what we were doing, and that's how we were catching most of our fish. Hooked up. Walleye after walleye after perch after walleye after pike. Another nice about 15 incher, loaded with fish out here. Now, whenever I go to a lake that I'm not very familiar with that time of year and fish and have some success, one thing I like to do is like, what would we have done the next day and the next day and the next day, you know, had we found that pattern or not found that pattern or whatever, right? Well, I think we were kind of on the pattern. Now, we filmed this whole video in one kind of area, right? And it was a large area, and you could fish there obviously for weeks probably on end in the fall and catch fish, but the wind kind of kept us in that corner of the lake. But I would kind of go around multiple different of these bigger points that come offshore, you know, something that looks like this. And you know, you can see it's real flat here, and then it comes way out on a point like this. I would go around to every point on this lake, and you know, kind of the deal was we were either catching fish that were 15 inches or we were catching fish that were 23, 24, 25 inches long. It was like they were either one or the other, a ton of eater-sized fish, and then we were getting some of those real nice fish. So one thing I would probably do to try to up my size would be like fish a bigger bait. Fish something like a bigger minnow on a jig, and you know, work through that area and hopefully weed out some of the smaller bites and attract some of those bigger bites. Or I would go to a plastic. It was so windy that day, it was difficult to fish a plastic just because you couldn't keep a tight line, and it was kind of challenging. But assuming it wouldn't be like that every day, what I would do is probably go to some kind of like big 4-inch paddle tail or something like that on a 1/4 ounce and kind of pump that thing through the zone. And a lot of times that's a good way to get bigger bites. But as far as what we were doing, where we were doing it, I definitely think you could replicate that across the whole lake, especially if you got some wind. I can see if it gets flat out, those fish kind of slide and go kind of a little bit more of an extended area. But that was kind of the deal. So hopefully you guys enjoyed kind of watching this video. That was kind of my breakdown of Winnibigoshish and the day we were there, and how we caught fish. So it's kind of rough, kind of crude footage just because we could only do so much based on the weather. But hopefully you guys enjoyed watching this. Hopefully you guys, you know, you guys that fish Winnibigoshish, maybe you guys comment and be like, yeah, that's the thing to do in the fall, I guess. I don't know. But thank you guys for watching. Hopefully this video is beneficial for you guys. If you're not yet, please subscribe. Stay tuned for more content. We'll be going back to Minnesota here in a day or two. And yeah, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.